Wanted to kick this episode off talking about some fun work I've been doing. I've been playing around with editors in browser editors. Um, and I want to bring a lot of our editing stuff into Build UI. I was just publishing last week's podcast, and I was like, I really want to bring we have this podcast admin. That'd be a great little piece of
Mhm.
functionality to bring into Build UI as admin. But I've also been playing with the app router in Build UI a little bit. It is pretty cool how you can have both of them going along at the same time. I really like that.
Yes.
I think that's something that they did really well in terms of the migration there. Um, but yeah, so basically, we've been writing these blog posts. I want to get more into that, and we start off. I think we had an episode about this where we talked about MDX and MarkDoc. You know how we
Yep.
ended up with MarkDoc, and our little CMS has like a Markdown editor, but it's really clunky. The UI. I think every CMS basically ends up having a clunky UI because they're trying to account for everything. And I just wanted to make something a really pleasant writing experience. I talked about DH. I saw DHH tweet about this, and they had created like a little his little Markdown thing for Hey, and he was talking about how much he enjoyed writing in it. And I think even as developers, we have our tools set up locally and we feel comfortable in them. There is something nice about a dedicated writing environment that you can just pop open a browser, save a draft, preview it live, publish it and stuff.
Hmm.
Because we had talked through some of the possible architectures where, you kind of want to write it locally, like that MDX local authoring experience is kind of the best. Um, but really, is it? Because it's local, and so now you either have to like open a PR, you have to rebuild it to fix a typo. Then we were talking about, and I looked into this a little bit. You can get remote content loaded into your local VS Code. So we worked on something at TED where the video editors could see like cloud files on their local OS X Finder, and it looked like they were just kind of like Dropbox. And there's APIs to do all that, and there's APIs to do that in VS Code too. So we were
Cool.
kind of thinking through, and this just been something I've been doing at night as a side project, thinking about like what's the ideal experience, and that was kind of an interesting one where you maybe click a button in like the admin section and it opens the blog post in VS Code, and you can kind of edit it and save it, and like just saving it will just persist it to our backend. But there's other things you want in the UI too. The publish stat, if there's a related recipe, who the authors are. So you really want this to be like a little page. So, anyways, I was looking at some of the rich text editor possibilities, options in React, modern ones. And there's Monaco editor, which is what powers VS Code, which is kind of like the natural starting point. Like we're writing technical blog posts. There's a lot of code in them. We have some custom components wired up to our like MarkDoc parser that can render the demos, and so that seems like it'd be a good solution, and to get it to match that VS Code experience. And I was running into some trouble. Monaco, it seems really full featured, but it seems like it's just large because it's literally the thing that powers VS Code. So it's large in its complexity surface area, and it's slow moving in terms of getting updates. So there's parts of it that are typed. You go to type in what the language is, which for this should just be Markdown, and it's like sometimes the props autocomplete and sometimes they don't. Anyways, I was having a hard time getting like syntax highlighting working the way I wanted it to, and I ended up checking out CodeMirror. Have you ever used CodeMirror before?
No.
It's really cool. There's like this React wrapper from this UIW team that does like a UI component library, but you can even use it pretty easily without that. And CodeMirror feels pretty nice when you're kind of in this territory of wanting to have your own custom setup. It's like this really modular project. The core editor, there's like an editor view and a state. You create the state, and then you like pass it to the editor, and you can like recreate the editor from the state, and you can register extensions that
I have a
add
question.
functionality.
I have a question. Who's so when you say like Monaco is for VS Code, I'm just like imagining VS Code in the browser. So it's
Yeah,
like I know it's for technical people. I know it's for like
right.
authoring code. What is CodeMirror? Is CodeMirror the same type of
Good
Same
question.
type of offering, where or is it where does it land in the like VS Code at one end of the spectrum and like generic WYSIWYG on the other end?
Right. It says it's a code editor component for the web. It can be used in websites to
Cool.
implement a text input field with support for many editing features. It has a rich programming interface to allow further extension. So it really is kind of about, um, editing code, which I guess writing a blog post is kind of like that, but kind of not. But so much of what we want to do in it is have, code snippets with language specified and prettier running and good syntax highlighting for JSX. Those are the kinds of things that we want, that make it more pleasant to write and fix typos and stuff.
Right.
And also Vim is another one. We both use Vim key bindings. So if you had a really nice writer interface, we would still want to be able to move around with Vim commands. Um, Even like collapsing sections can be nice. And syntax highlighting for Markdown too. And it's an interesting area of like UI and UX. We've talked about this before when it comes to like emails, because Markdown is almost like coding, right? And developers are comfortable writing code, and when you write up things, that's why people like .md files, .mdx files in their projects, because it feels like writing code and you're comfortable with the tools there. And there's a lot of things that you want to do that are similar to editing code, right? But it's like it's different enough that yeah. So, anyways, I started with Monaco, and I was just having some trouble, and so I found CodeMirror as I was looking for the alternatives. And I mean, Monaco's awesome. Like you drop in like a code snippet, and you can press like Command I and see like the TypeScript help in a TypeScript code snippet, which is pretty cool. And I looked at Matt Pocock's some of his recent work. He's added like a really lightweight version of Monaco editor for his examples that actually runs and it like compiles it so you can edit it. But he has it like load up and show type errors if he's trying to make a point about TypeScript, which is pretty awesome.
Nice.
But there were some things I couldn't quite get working with it, didn't like about it. So I was playing around with CodeMirror, and it's really neat. Um, I got the theme looking just like my editor. I got Vim added. There's an extension for that, Markdown, and all this stuff. And you can have like key bindings. So when I hit Command Save, it calls a React function right in my component, um, and it saves it and it shows that it's saving. And then I can Alt Tab to the preview, which live reloads and shows me that it's all on the live site, which is pretty neat. Um, so yeah, it just got me thinking about like it got me thinking a lot about like what is a good reusable thing here, because a lot of these kinds of things are pretty, they're designed to be reusable. CodeMirror exists by itself. You just new it up. It's a JavaScript API. But then there's a React CodeMirror project. And I was running into some problems and I with deploying it based on like the way our site was built on Vercel, because it's an older version of Next, and ultimately just upgrading the version of Next fixed it. But I was like, do we even need the React wrapper? A lot of times these days we try to avoid React wrappers when it comes to things like that. I don't want React D3. Our tooling and the ecosystem and the module system and all that stuff, as there's definitely still problems with it. But it's all good enough now, and the bundling is good enough now. You can reasonably expect to bring in something like a D3 and just have it work and not need like a React wrapper for it.
I
So
think I'd start with the React wrapper and then basically make it work, make it right, make it fast.
exactly.
Make it work is just like look for the npm install command.
Exactly. And this is the wrapper is well maintained. It's updated frequently. It has a lot of stars and popularity. So that's exactly how I started, and I only dropped down afterwards. But it still took a long time because it's just a complicated, this whole common mark, not common mark, the whole the Lexer stuff. What's the parsing stuff? What's like the ecosystem behind like the syntax tree standard behind like MDX and everything.
Oh, there's like there's like unified, I think
Yeah,
is the big.
unified. I
Yeah.
think it might be. I
And
think it
there's like
might be.
remark and rehype and yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot.
So all these extensions do something similar, right? You want to parse the text and then maybe apply a syntax highlighting or change it in some way. And but I didn't have to mess with any of that. But it's still just it's like it's a code editor. It's a whole piece of it's a piece of software running in your software. So it gets complicated pretty quick. And I was trying to think about like good ways to make it easier, or like what would be the ideal way for me to like use it in my situation at the beginning of this little side project. What would I want to bring in? You know, and we've talked about like Markdown editors before, having them take advantage of like server component features, um, and client component features when they need them, but being able to pre-render them or whatever, read
Hmm.
only.
Hmm.
So yeah, it was just like it was pretty interesting. But I don't know if you have any thoughts about that. But basically, like the common mark, I'm really happy with it now. I think if I had to do this again, I would reach for that one first. So it's just good to know about it. It's
What is common mark? Where's common
or
mark
sorry,
on
not
this?
sorry, not CodeMirror, CodeMirror, CodeMirror.
CodeMirror. Okay,
Yeah.
cool, cool.
Yep. And they have it's basically really really composable, and it's like a plugin ecosystem.
Hmm.
So you're gonna be configuring a lot of plugins and stuff, but they have good examples, and then they have like a basic setup that gets it going. But it's pretty awesome. I was pretty impressed with like what I was. It kind of gave me a lot of ideas for things that I would normally want to do in my editor, but I could just do it right there in the website.
Nice. Dude, I really like the idea of optimizing for an environment that you want to write in
Yeah.
because as soon as you move the CMS to a service, then you can't write locally anymore. And
Right.
that's a bummer. That's like a huge bummer.
Right.
And yeah, I feel like with a lot of these services, like I'm just laughing because I remember when we found the CMS, you're like, I'm never using anything other than the CMS.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
Because it was
I
nice not to have to make CRUD table UIs for like all these things.
Yeah, I think a lot of these services they hook you with the things you can't do today. You immediately see them,
Right.
um, but then over time you kind of like realize like what you're giving up, and you don't realize that right away. That's like kind of
Right.
the key thing. So yeah, I do really like the idea of optimizing for what is going to make you want to write because the
Right.
CMS, and maybe there's some CMS in the future that it's like that is, you know what, Medium actually kind of felt like this. Remember Medium?
Yeah.
Like the first version of Medium, it like made you want to write. It was
Yep.
just such a beautiful
Yep.
editor. So yeah, I
Definitely.
I think that's what to focus on. Like regardless of like the wrappers and the plugins and all
Mm-hmm.
that stuff. If it makes you want to open it up and write,
Mm-hmm.
that's good. You know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Also, like because something like CodeMirror exists and is so good, it's really not that hard to set it up yourself. So that makes you think that trying to find something else, even if we were like using a Rails app and they had a really good active admin setup, which is like the equivalent of, we could still have a singleton database that's for our CMS. We set up active admin, and that gives us the equivalent of our CMS, but it's like self-hosted. And all those kinds of tools have ways for you to define your own kind of input fields and stuff. Even HighGraph, the CMS we use, you can define like a custom input field. So I could probably make a React code mirror thing and have it in there. But there's just a lot of other stuff going on in there, because it has to
Hmm.
do a lot of stuff. And I just want this page. I want to add a button that just links to the live version and have a publish button and like just do my own thing. So I feel like for this kind of thing, even if you start off with something that comes out of the box, whether you're running it locally or you're using a hosted version, it feels okay to me to just go for the hot user flows that you really care about, to just jump to doing your own thing.
Hmm.
Um, I think even if I was using, yeah, I don't know if I would want to hook into a system for something like this. It's nice to just be able to build a page for it.
What do you mean? What do you mean by hook into a system?
Well, like make a cut. Like HighGraph has a Markdown editing type.
Mm, mm,
It
mm.
and it knows the data is Markdown, so it gives you a Markdown editor, but it's just not that good. And so
Right.
for what I want, and maybe I could make my own that has Vim mode and stuff. But at that point, I feel like I'd rather just be in like a clean little part of my admin area in Next with my own tools and doing my own thing, you know?
Yeah. I think key distinction here is that this is a tool that you are making for yourself and
Right,
you're a programmer. So
right,
you can see the difference between like this thing isn't working right now, but I know I could get it work. Like I don't have all my Vim key bindings, but
right,
I know that I could easily get those added. It's just going to take work. Where I found like when you use like when would you want to go to like a hosted CMS that allows you to write plugins and upload plugins to their service. That's when you're writing stuff like for non-programmers.
mm-hmm,
Um,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Someone that when they come across a bug, they can't just
right,
run the admin locally
right, right, right.
and add the features. So
Yep, yep,
yeah, I feel like because we're programmers, it's there's a lot more pain tolerance around that stuff because we know like how to make the changes to get the UI we want.
right.
It's a lot more work. I mean, it's more work for sure. But again, if it causes you to write more, then that's work well spent. So
Yep. Yeah, it's still I totally. I still think that it still felt like there is something here that's like MDX doesn't quite solve. You know, there's even tools that give you a UI that you hook into your local file. So that would be like the opposite of VS Code pulling remote data or hitting an API when you open or hit save. This would be like something in your admin that's editing your files. And when you hit save, it maybe creates a pull request to them. But that way you have like a more dedicated space, which is kind of, I guess, okay. Um, but both of the, it still feels like between all these options, there's still something that's like, it comes up when we talk about sending emails, right? It comes up when we talk about writing blog posts that you want a tool that can write. It just feels like there's something here. You're writing Markdown. It has a lot of technical content. It also has custom components. So like our MarkDoc renderer is configured with like a demo component, and I want to know that how to use the demo component. Maybe I want a button I can just click, you know, or the sidebar that shows me how to do it. Kind of like GitHub flavored Markdown shows you how to use it when you're writing. And I want to preview all that stuff. And I want that stuff to live in a database and not be dependent on the environment, like the actual, yeah, like we've talked about, having the content separate. It still feels like there's something. I just like the audience, the target of developers who want to write like not code, but basically Markdown, but it has a lot of code and code like things in
right.
it. There's like a missing gap there. It feels like if anyone knows any tools that they love for this sort of thing, I'd love to hear it. Um,
Yeah. I think you just listed so many different the surface area of
Requirements.
your problem, yeah, is so large
Yeah.
that I think that you want to optimize for like the composability stuff. So it's having one
Mm-hmm.
tool that does one thing really well, have another tool that does one thing really well, and you wire those things together.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
It's almost like MDX locally. I would say that's the closest when you set up a new static blog or even dynamic, but you have MDX working, you're saving it, you're getting fast refresh changes. It's pretty awesome, you know?
yeah, yeah,
Um,
for sure. Yeah.
so anyways, so that's something I've been working on. What you had something you want to talk about?
Let's do your Radix theme stuff.
Radix Themes thing? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I was going to talk about this too. This is another side project. So I have these fitness apps that I've made over the years, and I actually still use both of them. I have some other side projects that I don't use anymore, like the recipes one during COVID. COVID stopped. I don't cook anymore. So I actually have started cooking, but I don't use that app anymore. But there's this one app I have that is a remix app. It was like how I learned remix. And yeah, you use it. I use it. It's like a gym tracking app. It tracks your like weights and stuff. And it is just styled with Tailwind, nothing else. And I was working on it and adding some stuff to it the other day, and I noticed some like inconsistencies with like the form inputs and the buttons and stuff. And I was like, the borders were off, the height wasn't the same, like the button was rounded, you know, because when I made a button with Tailwind, I just made button PX3, PY2 rounded, boom, you know. But when I made a form input, I just did input or whatever. And I was like, I've been wanting to try Radix Themes. And so I ended up spending like 3 or 4 hours one night and I rewrote the whole thing from Tailwind to Radix Themes.
Nice.
And it was pretty interesting, man. It was pretty interesting. Um,
So you rewrote it in 3 hours. You rewrote the whole app.
yeah, there's like probably like 6 screens or something like that, maybe 7. There's like sign in, sign up, the home screen, exercise screen. You can edit, you can create an entry, and that's mostly it. That's basically it. And there's like graphs in there, and it's running on Fly, and it's backed by a database or whatever. So all that stuff is pretty standard Remix stuff.
Cool.
Um,
And the rewrite, my understanding of Radix themes is like they give you consistent styling in terms of like colors and inputs, but they also give you like the Radix components, like the more involved things like drop downs and so on.
Right. So Radix themes is kind of like style versions of their primitives, along with some other things. And when I was looking at this particular page with the form on it, originally I was thinking like, maybe I should bring in like Shad CN UI, or I should bring in Catalyst and try something that's. This is a side project. I open it every like 3 months, 4 months, sometimes usually it's more like I won't touch it for 6 months and then I'll like work on it a bunch. And I don't really want to have to make a design system style components myself. I just want to be told what to do basically here. And the last time I've done this is probably like 5 years ago with Materialize, right? And then I found Tailwind and I loved it. And so I always ended up doing it myself or just using whatever project had on it. But for my own projects, Tailwind's so great and I just use that. But this was one of those situations where if you don't, Tailwind is nice because it has constraints on the design tokens, but there's obviously still a lot that you need to be careful about if you want to, for example, reuse the same kind of button. And, usually in my projects and our projects, we kind of extract those things as we go. If we see there's similar buttons or similar header types, it's so easy to extract a component, and Tailwind's such a good fit for that. But the trend these days, a lot of the UI libraries like Shad UI, like Catalyst, they're like copy paste. You can just copy and paste them into your app, and then I can just use that. But I didn't want to paste more code into my app. I want this app to have like the least amount of code possible, just so I can get in there and see like very high level things. So I was like, I kind of want to give Radix Themes a shot. Like I haven't used it before. And initially when I saw it, I was like, they have these components like box and flex, where you use those for kind of the layout properties, and they all have padding props on them. And I'm like, so used to just using Tailwind, I want to be able to wrap something in a div and just like P2 it, empty for it. And so that was like, I'm not going to switch this over. But I was like, all right, let me just go all in on this and see how it feels. And I started with the form, right? I started kind of at the lowest level of the form because I knew they had text area and text field components. And yeah, basically by the end of it, I had done the whole thing. I got to tell you, man, I was really, really surprised and impressed with this, especially going in cold and feeling like there's going to be a lot about it I don't like because I'm just going to want to reach for Tailwind. I eventually removed all the Tailwind, basically, because it felt easier to make the screens look consistent, because that's basically the point of this tool, is to just give you all the things that you need for it. Now
That was
it's
gonna be
interesting. Yeah, go
that
ahead.
was yeah, that was gonna be my question. It's like, did you intermix Tailwind and themes, or was it just like if you came across Tailwind, you just deleted it and found a themes component to replace it with?
Eventually, I was able to replace everything with themes just because there were corresponding components and tools and primitives for them, with the exception of something like my chart. I have like a chart, and I use some Tailwind stuff for that, and that's just inside of a component, and it works perfectly with it. Basically, the first thing I did was remove the base reset from Tailwind, which made things break, and then added Radix. And then you just have the utilities. So you can still use the utilities anywhere. And actually, an upcoming version of Tailwind, there's like they use the at layers feature now, so I think they can make it so that you don't have you can have the base layer from Tailwind, the kind of resets that are needed for Tailwind to work, only apply on things where you're using only apply on elements where you're using Tailwind utilities. Meaning you could basically come into an app that uses Bootstrap, add Tailwind, and have it not break anything, but work if you were to start designing parts of it with Tailwind.
Whoa.
Yeah, I think that's I because they called that out. I need to look more into it, but I'm pretty sure that that is how they can avoid kind of the specificity wars and the fact that all CSS is global. Um, so pretty awesome, right? Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, man, there's a lot about the experience that would be fun to talk about. But I think the big thing is just I started. I kind of knew the philosophy. I've worked with the team. I've looked at the docs, and I knew the philosophy of Radix Themes, and I knew that like you have to buy into what they have, and this again is a perfect project because this is not something. It's a custom project, but it's not. It's
It's
not
low
something that
stakes.
it's low stakes, and it's okay if the it's a few pixels off from what I had with my own custom code, right? I'm actually eager to make that trade off. If their capital B button is consistent but a little different than what I have, but it still looks great, then I'm happy and eager to make that trade off. So that's the mentality I had. And there was a few things where normally this is how I would do it, but with their primitives, this is how you would do it. Like, I have a button and I want to make it width full. Like they don't have a width option on their button. They have like four sizes. It's like a size prop with one, two, three, or four. So if you want to make like a full width button, there is some ways to do it where you like wrap it in a flex and do like stretch children or something like that. That's like 5% of it. The rest of it was like you start rebuilding it.
Wait, your point,
But
but your point here is that you're not trying to figure out how to build every UI. You just want like, oh, you don't have a full width button? Fine, I'm going to use width 4 and be done.
exactly, exactly. And it is really surprising how close the new UI looks compared to the old UI, given that I basically have no custom class names in there, and it's just these UI components. I mean, I think it's pretty remarkable compared to the last time. Again, I've used something like this, how far the industry has come, but also these guys have a great design sense. You look at all their stuff, it's amazing. They've thought a lot about how these components work together. And they also, not only do they have this philosophy when they launched it about your button's going to have four sizes, text is going to have four sizes and like three weights or something like that, four weights, that's great for me. I'm always doing these colors with slash 25% opaque. I don't want any of that in my code.
Good.
You're like, yeah, that's the hardest thing to make look consistent. Um, Even the text color, like the link colors are, you choose your accent color, which is cool because you have some customized, you get to set some settings, some theme settings. I'll link to my video in case people have never seen this before, this library, because the idea is it's not like Shad UI where you copy and paste things into your project. It's more like something that you import, but there's options that you can use to customize things like the accent color and the roundedness of the border radius on the buttons and the forms in the modals and all this stuff. So it's fun because I got to make it look very similar to my app, the way it looked and felt right now. But there's just very limited options. How do you just render color text in a certain color? That was like really weird to me. And even though you choose an accent color like blue, and they show you a scale with 12 colors of blue, you're not choosing blue 500 or blue 5 or blue 6 or blue 7. Because if you're rendering a dark mode app, and my header is in dark mode and the rest of the app is in light mode, so you switch appearance dark with the theme provider just for the header, and all the colors are chosen for you so that they're accessible. They can be like high contrast. They work if they're rendered like over top of an opaque or a translucent modal. So it's kind of like you're just like, okay, it's in your hands, right? Jesus, take the
Mhm.
wheel. I'm just gonna do this, and I'm gonna trust that my UI is gonna work everywhere. The tab bar that I use at the top, they have a tab bar and it has a color, and the color wasn't quite the same as what I had it, but it was chosen deliberately, and it's a different blue than what you would see in like a link, maybe slightly differently because of when you hover, there's like a background on it. So as I started going, right, definitely at the beginning, there's like all this friction. And of course, you're like, okay, I have a div here and it's doing flex, justify center, and is adding margin and padding, and it's like setting the display to whatever. Or I have a text that also is setting display to flex. And now I have like these flex blocks and stuff, and it's like using those components for each individual thing. Again, it's only like one or two it's like one or two levels where there'd maybe be a div before. I got over that really, really quick. And once I did, this text is a link. This text is a button. That's why they're blue. It's not that you make text blue. It's that you use a link or you render a button. And if you want your button to look like a button, that's like the default variant. But then there's like a ghost. There's 5 variants: ghost, standard, classic, soft. Right. So in the form where you add your sets, you can change the color to gray, and then you can change the variant to soft, and that's it. That's all you do. And by the end of converting my first page, I was like, I just want to keep going and like convert the rest of the pages. I was like looking on GitHub and I was looking at the diff, and you're just looking at all these class names. And I love Tailwind and I still use it. And if I had to build something that you gave me in Figma, I would use Tailwind. But I was looking at this and I was like, this is going to make me want to open this app and just go to work on this, because not
Nice.
only does it basically look like my app did before, it looks better because it's more consistent, and and it's just it's this is the main thing for me. It is their responsibility. It's like this library has taken on responsibility of making sure my UI is gonna look clean, consistent, and accessible. It's gonna work well. Accessible is not even about the colors. It's about things like the button press already has like select none on it. If I start a new next app with Tailwind, and you need to render a button, you're starting with HTML button. There's nothing on that. It's going to have this weird select behavior on mobile. It might zoom if you hold down on it too much. Um,
Focus
the
styles,
focus styles are going to be weird. It's
focus
not going to the
visible.
focus visible. How do you do all that? All of these things from Radix Themes are coming from the Radix primitives, but they're basically like, again, Shad UI is like the Radix primitives in an opinionated version that you take ownership of, which is great because you can change them. This is an app where I didn't want to change them, so I'm like, you guys just do it. And it's like, man, I can't tell you how good it felt. Like I was watching like NBA and just like going through this thing, and I would, get a heading, and I was like, oh, 6, no, 7, and it's like, oh, 6 is fine, and then it's like the default H1, right? And I'm like, I'm just gonna use that on every page, and I don't have to think about it. And if I was doing my own thing, I might be like looking at it on the device and really tweaking it and stuff. This, like you said, low stakes side project. I couldn't believe how fast it was and how good it felt coming out of it. And yeah, just all the things I didn't have to think about. It was like a really successful use. Like it was really cool. And just knowing that I'm going to be upgrading Radix themes, and there's going to be some new accessibility thing that they fixed in a button, or the when you do a drop down menu inside of a modal that's going to work now because that's their code. I don't want to look at that stuff. I don't want to tweak it in my app. I thought it was a really cool example, good use case for this library, and I was really impressed with how far it could cover.
Cool. Dude, the thing I think I have a whole bunch of questions, but the thing I think that really stands out to me, or my initial reaction, is it's so interesting the trade off between I want to take control of the design versus like I I'm building an app that I want to write data to a database, and like the UI is not the primary concern. Basically, not that's not a fair way to say it because that sounds like it's going to be a bad UI.
Right.
It's more that like I am way more opinionated about, like, this is a fitness app. I'm way more opinionated about how you enter the workouts and how
The
I do
data
the
model.
calculations.
Yep.
Exactly. Where the like the brand aspect of it does not matter. Where I can see some people saying like, no, I need to use Tailwind because my designers are going to give me a Figma file. You even said this, my designers are going to give me a Figma file, and it has to match. So it's just, I think it's really good. Like before you even start working on an app, like kind of having an idea where you are on that spectrum, because if tweaking every pixel is important to you, and you do choose one of these UI library tools, you're signing up for pain.
Definitely.
Um, but the opposite is also true. So I love, it's just, yeah, I love the trade off. I love thinking of it and hearing how well this worked for you. It's awesome.
Totally. Um, if you look at examples of something like a button that we've taken a lot of time to work on, or a heading, there's a lot of classes there because you care a lot about it. It's the best way to write a custom heading. The question is, every time I add a heading to One Rep Max, my side project, do I want to write all those, or do I just want to use something, right? And 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 of course, I could create my own component that has all those classes, and I just use that over and over again. But there's such a spectrum between this is a shared heading and this is like text that will work everywhere. That's where I think the balance in Radix Themes is really, really nice. There are enough variants and sizes that you can build an app responsively, and all the pieces are going to work together great. I have like a switch next to an input on a table, and it's all from Radix, and it looks great. But there are constraints, and for me, it was so liberating because I could just, I just one or two, one's a little small, two, okay, two seems right,
Dude,
and
constraints are so good.
so
Constraints are
good.
more developers need constraints.
Yes, I remember like the day you came in, and I had talked about this with you. That was the thing I was most excited about because it just let me move a lot faster and delete a lot of code. And if I had those things, those pre-designed Radix components in my app, of course I would be tempted to go and change text large to text 15x or whatever with the JIT,
But this is where I think, regardless of whether you use Radix themes or not, or whatever, just acknowledging where you are on that
Right.
trade-off scale, and just saying like, yeah, even if this stuff was in your app, I'm not going to touch it. Like,
Exactly.
that's what I signed up for. But I think, to your point, like, having the stuff not even in your app is even more liberating. So
The
yeah.
temptation's not there.
Yeah.
And you're really locked down. And I wouldn't trust that because I've had bad experiences with that in the past where there's obvious things missing and it's just not even helpful anymore. The fact that I got through this entire rebuild in like a couple hours and it worked everywhere. I mean, they have the tab bar, they have everything.
The fact that
And
they started with Radix and
yeah,
then layered on the themes
exactly.
is a very nice direction. Yeah.
Yep, and they do have ways, of course, to add your own stuff, like how they would think about adding it. I didn't want to touch any of that, um, but I also will say that philosophically, the maintainers are very much committed to this, so that you go to the issues and you're like, "How do I do this thing that's not supported?" And they're like, "Oh, well, here are your options. Oh, but I want to do this different color of a tab bar, or I want to make it like not have a background." And they're like, this is the tab bar component that we have. You can do that stuff,
Nice.
but it's like, to me, that was really reassuring that in a year from now, when I open this, it's not going to have become this massive library with a million options. It's going
The
to
worst
be
response they sorry, go ahead.
yeah, it's going to stay true to what it is
Right.
right now, which is an opinionated set of components that you're responsible for, you, the design team, the maintainers, that I'm going to get to take advantage of and not have to maintain that aspect of my app.
Yeah. The worst response they could give is just override the CSS class, and they
Right.
have a bunch of targeting, and there's a
Exactly.
couple importance in there, and then
Yep.
boom,
Yep.
it works. Yeah. You want There's a few open source libraries I use, and ESBuild reminds me very much of that. People are always asking for features in ESBuild, and the maintainer is just so good at communicating
Mm.
and so good at saying, this is not in scope of the project.
Mm-hmm.
He has all that stuff documented in the docs, and he just closes the issues. And I love
Yeah.
that
Oh
because
yeah.
it's very clear why you should be using this. Not to change the subject, but I love libraries that are, yeah, focused on one thing and not just trying to make everyone happy.
Dude, I think that's actually a really good point, and I think it's really hard for maintainers to do that. I mean, we've maintained big open source projects before, and it's
Super
that's the
hard.
kind of thing that's they're actually never going to hear thanks for, you know. But
Yeah.
it's so reassuring for you as an app developer to see that that's how they maintain things. So I'm glad that you called that out because it can be hard to do that, and it feels like, especially when you get started, if one of your projects takes off and you just want to make people happy, that's like, oh, I can do that. Um, but yeah, I mean, you look at a lot of our favorite libraries and frameworks; they're very careful about adding things because they want to understand what you're trying to do. Every new API is something to maintain that could potentially break or cause them to have to move slower. So yeah, good call out for that. So yeah, this kind of fits that bill where it's like it's this very nice constraint thing, and the fact that I could make a real app again that looks custom. It doesn't look like bootstrap site or a materialized thing. You know what I mean? Um, I was really
Cool.
impressed. So I think
Uh,
that's one cool way you could have like a cage match of this, where you get a bunch of these things and see how far you can get before you need to do your own custom stuff, and then see what the custom stuff looks like. Because as I was going, that's the other thing that was nice about it. I still had things in Tailwind around and near, and it was fine because those are just utilities and they don't contaminate anything, So they worked together well. But I would say there's even a call out in the docs that are like, you should try to, if you're going to use this is like this is the way you'll feel most successful with it. Is if you don't try to add a bunch of your own stuff, whether it's Tailwind or you know adding style prop to buttons or your own CSS that targets our buttons, right? You just the goal is to have something that's like really consistent, easy to work on, easy to use, but it still looks great, still looks custom. Really impressed.
nice. One question. I know there's like a graph you have in this app, and that graph is like you have a bunch of D3 code. So is there like how does that integrate with themes? Or you just
Yeah, good
like
question.
dewash it?
They the D3 code, the chart, the path on it was, and the dots had colors that were driven by a Tailwind color, and the way they did that was with current color on the SVG, and then text blue or text sky 500 from Tailwind. And so once I swapped that out, I just wrapped the whole thing in like something that had a color, like a text that had a color or something like that, and it just absorbed the color. It inherited the color from the parent.
Cool.
There's also ways to access. I might have even looked at the ways to access the color because it's just a CSS variable too. So you could do something like, a div with a style tag, or you could even use the CSS variables from your Radix Themes theme in Tailwind. So if you wanted to use like the JIT and access, my accent color, you can do that because they're all CSS variables. You can do that in Framer Motion. I think I did it somewhere because I have some animation there with Framer Motion that worked just fine. So yeah, that was easy, and
What about like the layout of the graph? Are you using like Tailwind to lay that graph out?
the layout is 100%. It takes the size of its parent, and it has a fixed aspect ratio. So that was
That's a
inside of
D3.
my D3. It might actually still
Gotcha.
be Tailwind. It might actually still be Tailwind because I basically it was fine and I didn't really open it. I know on our line chart that I put in Build UI, we were using Tailwind for like the text nodes and stuff. Although sometimes with text you just use SVG text, but um, I think there might be some Tailwind in the D3 chart,
Cool.
which is cool too because it's kind of like separate UI. But yeah, it was really neat, really neat. So I
Very cool.
suggest people check it out, especially for side projects, especially if you're kind of a skeptic like me going into this with these kinds of UI libraries that give you all of these primitives. It's kind of like writing it off for my own work from the beginning, where it's like when I start this, I'm gonna need to bring in like a box and all this stuff because I usually Tailwind. One of our first conversations with Adam actually was like Tailwind was really good for the stuff in between components, the spacing, the layout, and stuff. And I mean, these components are basically the same as how we use div dot flex dot item center. It's all the same stuff, and it's actually the TypeScript complete is actually pretty. It's actually pretty nice because it's just kind of more limited in what you can do and what you need. And then you end up looking at the docs to see how to do it, and it's like, oh, it's not a lot of code. And then you get in this flow where you don't have to look at the docs anymore, which is pretty cool.
Cool.
So yeah, it was fun. I think people should give it a shot. We'll put a link up to that project, Radix Themes. It was really neat. I would definitely like to use it again or like in the admin area of Build UI or another side project. I think it'd be really cool for that kind of thing. So
Nice.
awesome. Shall we wrap it up?
Yes, sir.
Cool. All right. Thanks for listening. If you have any questions for us, hit us up at Front End First FM on Twitter, and we'll see you next time. Bye bye.
See ya.